After an agonizing deluge of delays, the wait is finally over. The most anticipated film of the last 5 years has arrived, and now the questions can be answered. Has the unfilmable been filmed? Has Denny done it?
You can see spice in the air.
We open with this perfect prologue. It simultaneously provides new information to viewers who haven't read the book while introducing the audience to this scale and tone and atmosphere of this tense, tumultuous tale.
By controlling spice production, they became obscenely rich. Richer than the Emperor himself.
We are then introduced to our false prophet Paul, the main antagonist of the film, and I think it's fair to say that Timothée Chalamet was perfectly cast in this role. He embodied the youth and naivete of this beginning step in the archetypical hero's journey, as well as his depth and knowledge and authority that his royal blood and all these courging prophecies command. He was Paul ripped straight from the page and realized here on the big screen. Our first view of the voice is then revealed. The Bene Gesserit precise, perceptive, pinpoint manipulation that is able to command people of lower intellect their will and whim. I think the use of edits here, the way we saw inside Jessica's head and saw her giving the glass to Paul, all the edits, the sound design and the performances executed what is in the book with relative precision. Natural, organic, interesting, and completely sensical. We get all this exposition here, and this is how you do exposition. You don't just bombard the audience with every little aspect of how this world functions. You see Paul organically by himself learning a little bit of lore about the Fremen and the spice here. For newcomers who aren't familiar with the book, this is straightforward, this is simple, and overall it's engaging and well executed. Exposition done well, people.
With sandstorms powerful enough to cut through metal, only the native tribes known as the Fremen have adapted well enough to survive.
The world building is immense in this film. It just opens up to us and we see this scale and atmosphere and tone and aesthetics and the design. It's all inherently beautiful and just realized at the pinnacle of filmmaking, in my opinion. I think that some people were worried about Jason Momoa bringing some eye-rolling escapades into this art house film, and his role definitely has been increased to make it more accessible for a mainstream audience, being his high level of fame. But I was a fan of Momoa far before Aquaman, far before Duncan Idaho, far before Khal Drogo, back when he was Ronin in Stargate Atlantis, and I've always liked him and I always enjoy watching him on screen, and the same can be said here. I like Momoa, I enjoy seeing him on screen, and I don't hold any ill will or preconceived negative connotations towards him.
Dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake.
I was very pleased and surprised at the level of ethereal and surreal and grindy, trippy, psychedelic themes and sequences we got in this film. If you read the book, it's very evident that Frank Herbert was influenced by the psychedelic revolution, being that the book was released in 1965 and there was a lot of drug experimentation going on at the time. He obviously was influenced by LSD, and it is a big part of his weird, trippy, ethereal, psychedelic book. And the fact that Denny rolled the dice and took this risk and included all of these weird, surreal moments in this big $170 million film, I loved it. I love Nicholas Winding Refn and David Lynch and surrealism and all those weird psychedelic stoner moments, and to see them here realized in a almost $200 million sci-fi epic based on one of the greatest sci-fi novels ever written, it was just amazing and right up my alley. Something that really resonates with me on a deep humanistic level. Within the setup for the first act of this film, Oscar Isaacs, who plays Duke Leto, gets this beautiful emotional moment with Paul, and I think he balances out this complex character well. He's compassionate, yet under immense pressure. He's a kind and loving father and partner, yet he's walking on the edge of a knife, and everything is bearing down to destroy him. And I think that he was able to play that out well. You could feel and sense both of those conflicting elements. It was both part of the script, and Oscar Isaacs was able to realize it with his acting. Also, he has a beautiful beard.
I found my own way to it. Maybe you'll find yours.
Ripped straight from the pages of the book, Gurney and Paul's sparring was modern and choreographed beautifully. It provided context and information about how shields function for new members of the audience. It also introduced us to this grizzled, dark, brooding yet humanistic military commander. It was as well as you could take that passage from the book and realize it on the big screen in 2021. It's almost like Denis done it.
But look down, my lord. You're to join me in death. I see you found the mood.
So let's talk about House Harkonnen, Hans Zimmer's horribly emotive score, and the Baron. Everything is put in place to build up the Baron's presence with a precise and extreme amount of tension. We have this beautiful HR Giger inspired architecture and design. Hans Zimmer's score is so brutal and grinding and emotive. It just sits you in these moments of horror, and it's just building and building to the reveal of this larger than life villain in all these horribly disgusting elements.
A dangerous, jealous man.
There's this surge of suspense every time Stellan Skarsgård's stellar performance as Vladimir Harkonnen is on the screen. He gets very little screen time, but the cinematography and tone and editing and everything is just building up this moment. He's this larger than life, decadent, disgusting, yet highly intelligent and formidable villain. He has a lot of the attributes of Tony Soprano, both superior and commanding and intelligent, but at the same time disgusting and vile and gross. He was an allegory for the Greek Empire, the decadence that had gone too far, the gluttony, but yet intelligence and superiority, and the makeup and Skarsgård's performance just captured my attention every time he was on screen. All those little moments, I was just completely immersed in his performance and the intensity of this huge man. My favorite sequence in the film by far is the Gom Jabba sequence. Quentin Tarantino was once quoted, and I'm just, saying it verbatim here, I'm not actually quoting him, but basically he was saying that a director's main job is to allow the audience to feel the emotions that he's trying to convey. And I was at such a high emotional peak by the crescendo of this sequence, I couldn't believe it. It's one of the most intense sequences and moments I've had watching a film.
Fear is the little death that brings obliteration.
Come here, kneel. Oh my god, these quick cuts in the editing, the fade out, the sound design, the angle choice here. This is the voice. This is how it is. This is how you would realize it on the screen, right? What it is on the page, it's different to realize it on the big screen. And I think this little moment here perfectly encapsulates what the voice is. It's almost like Denis done it.
Come here, kneel.
Charlemagne's performance, Denis' direction, Hans Zimmer's harrowing score, they all coalesce here in this surging spike of suspense of a scene. Oh my god! The narrative depth and story complexities with the inclusion of the Kwisatz Haderach and all those prophecies, I was surprised at how much was able to be sewed into this narrative as it marched along. it probably took 10 hours of the book and was able to do it in 2.5 hours. It was surprising. It just kept on moving on at this incredible pace for the first hour with amazing sequence after amazing sequence. With some trippy, transcendental meditation where I was just trapped in this moment, almost on the brink of freaking out. It was amazing.
You were told to bear only daughters, but you in your pride thought you could produce the Kwisatz Haderach.
There's this extraordinary dive into the culture and the history and the religion and the traditions of the Fremen in the novels. Herbert did a lot of studies on Middle Eastern culture, and he weaved this ideology into the Fremen in this new science fiction context. And I think as far as you can take it with the very limited screen time they were given in this film, that Denis tried to do that and executed it as much as he could with a few scenes here and there with the Fremen, really. I think one of the best examples of this is the Shout Out Mapes Maker sequence where she offers Jessica the knife. I'm not sure how this would play to a new audience, if they'd even know what the fuck was going on, but as a book reader and knowing all the context and all the deep lore and mythology around these people, it was incredibly exciting to see how serious Denis was taking the source material.
Maker of the deep desert.
Javier Bardem is one of the greatest actors currently acting. I think he's possibly, and this is taking into consideration all 26 films, possibly the best Bond villain of all time. His character in Skyfall is fucking amazing, and his performance is incredible and just captivating and immersive. We get very little of him here, but he is able to do the same. Stilgar is just presence. He's this manifestation of authority and command and these strong desert people. And even though we get very little of him here, his first sequence is like, yeah, I can see what he would do with this role and how well cast he is. And if part 2 happens, I can't wait to see more of this incredible actor as this incredible character in these incredible films.
Hold.
Liet Kynes' gender swap neither added nor subtracted from the narrative. Overall, it was completely inconsequential. It neither offended or intrigued me.
Judge of the change, sire. Dr. Liet Kynes.
My Lord Duke. Welcome to Arrakis.
Having this mass of a monstrous worm bear down upon Paul as he's having his first real experience with this spice was incredibly suspenseful. The way he was freaking out and all the sound got ripped out of the scene, and just the building tension of this monstrous monster bearing down upon him was all executed brilliantly. And then this super surreal, suspenseful sequence was just spiked by him and Gurney sinking into the sand. They get away eventually, but yeah, a great first reveal of both the spice and the worm simultaneously really having their first real moments on screen. In my mind, from a technical level, this film seems to be at the pinnacle of filmmaking prowess. The cinematography and the tone and the aesthetics and the editing and the sound design and the costumes and the casting and the sets and the score, it all utilized this $170 million budget to the maximum of costs, and it just seems to be at the highest levels of quality that filmmaking can currently get to. Obviously, also behind all of that, you have the vision and the artisan of this French-Canadian director.
May his passage cleanse the world and keep the world for his people.
Maniacal Mongolian throat singing. This Sardaukar hypnotic chant is so brutal yet so beautiful. Oh my god! I think Rebecca Ferguson did a good job at Jessica. She isn't given a whole lot of scenes or a whole lot of moments to emote or show her acting chops, but that is kind of Jessica. She has this authoritative state that she puts out to everybody. We don't really get to see her vulnerability in this first part. A lot of it is within her head and her thoughts. That shows her human side and her vulnerability, but outside she's dominant and commanding and strong-willed, and she'll convey that beautifully. I'd like in the second part, if it ever happens, to see more of a vulnerable human side and for her to get more emotive acting moments, but we'll see what happens. But as far as this goes and her role, she's Lady Jessica. I think the peak of the narrative extremity in this film is the big and spectacular attack on House Atreides, with this spectacular destruction and action sequence. It comes at about an hour and 20 minutes into the film, and it really is the coalescing of all this tension and suspense and build up of the narrative. We get the big release, the death of Duke Leto, and all those moments here. And nothing in the last hour of the film is really able to top that. Obviously, the natural crescendo of this entire story is Paul and the Fremen attacking House Harkonnen. Spoilers. But we all know that you can't tell this story in 2 hours, i.e. David Lynch's Dune. So it's hard for me to criticize the pacing or structure of this film, knowing that it does follow the movements of the first part of the first book. But obviously the first part of the first book isn't a 3-act structure. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Here we get a beginning and a middle and kind of another beginning. So I can understand why some audiences were bored. The peak of the film really comes, at that hour and 20 mark, once that spectacular action sequence has been executed and once Duke Leto has been executed. But, I mean, Denis staying faithful to the book. Everything that comes after that doesn't reach that high crescendo, that high ceiling, but I mean, it's such a high crescendo and a high ceiling, it's hard to. And we need to see the slowing down of the tone and Paul and Jessica being introduced to the desert and just trying to survive and having all those quiet moments. So I can understand why a lot of audience members would have been fatigued sitting in the cinema, trapped for 2 hours and a half. But at the same time, Denis staying faithful to the book. That's what happens in the first half of the book. That's what happens when you cut the story in half, I guess. You don't get the logical and most extreme and fulfilling conclusion. That's going to come later, maybe. Denis has talked about his interest in doing a 3-movie arc and also adapting Dune Messiah. Spoilers for that book here. And I think that would be the absolute pinnacle and cherry on top of how beautiful this movie is. This movie is the start and the introduction to a world. The first book really builds up the archetypical hero and the hero's journey and this messiah and prophet. But Herbert's overall message wasn't just to tell Luke Skywalker's story, just to say, hey, how awesome's Luke Skywalker? He builds up these archetypes and then he completely deconstructs the archetypical hero's journey and points out that charismatic leaders are inherently flawed and that eventually everyone will be corrupted by power and no one can really be trusted. So to see Denis, if it ever happens, adapt Dune Messiah, and to see the deconstruction and destruction of every facet of Paul's psyche and physical being as his eyes are burnt out and he wanders into the desert would be absolutely amazing. And that is a large part of all I can think of while I watch this film. But either way, I'm glad this film exists and I will enjoy this film if this is it. But not only do we need part 2 of this first book, we need to see Dune Messiah adapted as well. Also Children of Dune and God Emperor Dune. I thought it was brilliant how they intercut the Baron interrogating and executing the lame Leto as Paul gets his message from Dr. Yui and finds the ducal signet ring and realizes his father has died. It really shows the difference between two chapters of a book and how when you put them on the screen and can intercut them, you can tie these emotional moments together as one moment. And it just struck me as, yeah, adapting a book to film, they are two completely different mediums, and intercutting that quick within the book would have been confusing and incomprehensible. But here we understand that these two simultaneous moments playing out together have these engrossing emotional ties and mean the exact same thing, that Leto is dead. The image of these hazmated Harkonnens as they enter the poisoned chamber and recoil in horror at the image of the Baron clinging to the roof will stay with me for a while. It was so macabre, yet so beautiful. The importance of the spice cannot be understated. When you read the book, you're in Paul's head and you understand this massive entwining latticework of possible futures that he's trying to navigate. He's trying to avoid this global jihad and try to avoid becoming this tyrannical dictator, but he doesn't quite know how to navigate it and what step will lead to what action, and what action will lead to what outcome. He's basically having a psychological breakdown a lot of the times, and while reality is playing out in front of him, he's stuck within his own head, just having these visions play out again and again, trying to navigate the right path. And it's hard to have that play out on screen, because unless Paul just says it to someone, which I guess he could, you can't have his inner thoughts, his inner monologue. But the importance of the spice was a big part of this film, and Denis was obviously aware of its importance. The scene where Paul is in the tent and you can see the spice in the air and he freaks out. And it does flash to all these possible alternative or possibly realized future timelines where Paul and Chani and Jameis are reigning over Caladan, and you do kind of get it. I'm not sure how a fresh audience would interpret this, if they'd get the context, and they obviously wouldn't get the deeper context, but as much as you can adapt what's on the page, I think it's here. We obviously understand that the spice is very, very important to not just the Fremen and the Spacing Guild and navigation, but to Paul and his rise to power, and then his complete psychological and physical deconstruction. Having recently rewatched Lawrence of Arabia, I now consider it to be one of the greatest films of all time. I mean, obviously, people consider it to be one of the greatest films of all time because it is one of the greatest films of all time. But I'd watched it maybe a decade ago and hadn't rewatched it since. But rewatching it, what really stuck out to me was the desert of Jordan and the beautiful landscapes and the reality of going out in a real desert and filming these sequences. The film is inherently fucking beautiful. It's fucking amazing. There are so many awe-inspiring shots in this movie that just melted my mind. And knowing that Denis was filming in Jordan, I expected to see a lot of the same, but really, we haven't even gotten into the Fremen yet. We haven't even gotten into the desert yet, or Arrakis, or survival. And I hope to see a lot more of these beautiful, sweeping, real landscape shots. I mean, they did go out in Jordan and they filmed a lot of it there, but really, this movie is leading up to the desert. So I was a little disappointed about that, but it makes sense, and I hope in the second film, if it happens, I hope that we see this large, epic, grand, sweeping cinematography that we did in Lawrence of Arabia. If you haven't watched Lawrence of Arabia, sit down and watch it. It goes for like 3 hours and 40 minutes, and it's fucking amazing, and it's basically Dune, except for instead of space Muslims, they're just Muslims, and Lawrence never does acid, unfortunately. Some fans of the book may be disappointed that there's no Fade Ralpha in this film. We don't see Princess Irulan or the Emperor Shaddam IV of House Carino. But yeah, you're trying to balance out this immense narrative, this immense story, and this depth of this world, and the Fremen and the spice, and I mean, how many characters are just within House Atreides that you need to set up? I mean, it makes sense to leave that stuff out and include it in the sequel if it happens once a lot of these characters have died. So yeah, I look forward to Fade Ralpha and Princess Irulan and Shaddam IV, and I fucking hope that we get to see them, eh? I think this movie's doing alright at the box office. Hopefully they'll factor in the HBO Max viewings, but I mean, whether or not it crosses the cultural zeitgeist and is able to transcend just high concept sci-fi fans or previous fans of the novel and moves into the general public pop cultural awareness, we're yet to see. But I mean, it should, because it's fucking spectacular and beautiful as just a film. And even a normie who has no idea what's going on should be able to sit there in awe at just the filmmaking prowess and the absolute beauty of this fine piece of art. Zendaya did fine as Chani. She's barely in it for a limited screen time. I thought she did alright. There you go. Let's move on. It may be anticlimactic to end on Paul killing Jameis and not the complete destruction of House Atreides and the execution of Duke Leto, but as I previously stated, it's hard to navigate how to execute this. Either you have a 4-hour movie, which a lot of people aren't going to sit through because I don't know why. I can understand if you watch it in the cinema. Or you cram it all into one movie, which doesn't fucking work. We already know that. Or you end it at that moment when House Atreides is destroyed, but then you have way too much to tell in the second movie. So you're left with this moment, the end of the film, where Paul kills Jameis. It's still an incredibly important step forward for Paul. It's the first person he ever kills. It's his first moment that he gets truly accepted into the Fremen culture, and it's a milestone towards manhood. It doesn't reach the levels that the first hour and 20 minutes did, but it's what the book is, and it's still beautiful and slow and psychedelic and amazing. In conclusion, is this a perfect film? No, but nothing's perfect. I mean, what is a perfect film? What is a perfect song? What is a perfect album? What is a perfect band? What is a perfect artist? What is a perfect painting? Do any of these things actually exist? Can the conceptualization of perfection actually be executed in art, knowing that we all have objective and subjective opinions that all differ? I don't think so. For me personally, this tied in a lot of elements which I enjoy and love a lot within art and cinema. I mean, it's one of my favorite books. It's almost $200 million sci-fi film. It's trippy and grindy and psychedelic and surreal, which I fucking love. I think the main criticism is that it peaks in the middle and it doesn't peak at the end, and if you're forced to sit down and watch it all at once in a cinema, that perhaps you could become fatigued or bored. I think television as a medium is superior to film in this aspect, because if this was a television series, then you could just watch an hour at a time and watch 5 hours in a row if you wanted, or watch each episode as you felt like it. But then if it was a television show, it wouldn't have a $170 million budget for 2.5 hours. It would be much smaller in scale, and the grand, spectacular nature of these action sequences and the sets and the design, none of that would be there. I mean, Game of Thrones gets close as close to a feature film as you can, but it's not on the scale or epicness of this fucking movie. So in conclusion, what would I say? There's two facets to analyze here, I guess. Is it an adequate adaptation of the book? Yes. Were some things left out? Yes. Were some things changed? Yes. Can you do an exact 100% rendition of a book to the screen? No. They're different mediums and they don't translate exactly the same, obviously. I think Denis understood, well, I know that Denis understood and loved the source material. And I think he was able to take the best elements of it and execute them here. It surprised me how much depth and nuance we had around the Kwisatz Haderach and the Bene Gesserit and these coalescing prophecies and the spies. We didn't really get into the Fremen, but we got those little moments where like he understands how big and important they are to the narrative. There's also another aspect, which is it a competent film? And yes, it's not only a competent film, it's an amazing, beautiful piece of fucking artwork which will last the ages as hopefully one of the greatest movies ever made. But that's just me talking personally, maybe. Also, will it transcend the general audience and become a cultural phenomenon like The Lord of the Rings, like Game of Thrones, like Twin Peaks? I don't know. We'll find out. Will we get a sequel? I don't know. Will we get Dune Messiah? Fucking hope so. Either way, I feel like I've touched upon a lot of stuff that I wanted to touch upon. And I could go on and on and on. Writing these notes and figuring out what I was actually going to talk about was very hard. I pressed play on the movie and then I started writing and I couldn't stop writing and I had to pause the movie every 10 seconds. And I got to the point where I was like, I'm talking about every scene and breaking down every scene and just saying how amazing it is. The movie's good. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I've eaten all day and I've drunk 2 beers and I think I'm getting too drunk and I probably need to wrap this up. In conclusion, Dune was good. Thank you all for watching. Really help out. If you can like, subscribe, and in the comments, tell me something. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know anymore. Okay? Cut!